Good afternoon, Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com, here with your hurricane outlook and discussion for September 27th, 2016. Taking a look at what's happening with 97L. Clearly you can see the rotation in here counterclockwise at the surface, clockwise in the upper parts of the atmosphere. Overall, the environment is favorable for development. There is some dry air over on the west side of this system. In fact, Recon, the hurricane hunters, are down there right now as I am recording this, and they are reporting that there is some dry air over on the west side, and you can tell a little bit in the satellite presentation. It's a little bit thin over here, whereas the thicker convective bands wrapping around right in here somewhere, indicating also buoy information, etc., that this is producing winds to near tropical storm force, but it probably still lacks a well-defined low-level center. But there may be one trying to develop somewhere in here. This is Barbados. This is Trinidad and Tobago, to give you a reference point. Here's Guadeloupe up here as an example of what's what here in the Lesser Antilles. And if we move out and look at a wider shot, the system would be moving generally towards the west here with time, maybe to the north of Barbados a little bit. It's hard to say for sure. It depends on where the low-level center forms. You can also see the very favorable upper-level winds here, the outflow, fanning out into that clockwise pattern that I talk about so many times. This is on its way. Not going to intensify rapidly. The season hasn't supported that. We've certainly seen that. So this is going to be slow going for intensification until it gets over here into the Caribbean Sea, it looks like. Now, I still think this has a pretty good shot at becoming a tropical storm before it reaches the Windward Islands. If we look at the tracks from this morning's what we call spaghetti model plots. And why do they call it that? I think it's pretty obvious. These look like little spaghetti strings or whatever. So that's what they call it. And generally speaking, models in pretty good agreement that this heads towards the central Windward Islands. Over the next 24 to 36 hours, it would be crossing that area. Barbados, being out in front, would take the brunt of this first. And it really doesn't matter, as I mentioned in my blog post, and hopefully this goes without saying, that it doesn't matter what we call it. If it's a tropical depression or a tropical storm, these rain bands here are going to bring rain and squally conditions, strong northeast winds here, and then eventually the winds will shift, the seas will build, if not already, they will certainly do so, and you're going to get some squally weather, tropical storm conditions in spots across the Windward Islands. Luckily, this is not a hurricane right now, and so we don't have to worry too much about that. Speaking of hurricane, when would that happen? Well, the HWRF model, the Hurricane Weather Research Forecast model, indicating this becomes a hurricane fairly quickly. I think this is overdone. The rest of the intensity envelope here, a fairly steady increase over time, up into major hurricane status perhaps, but certainly a solid hurricane as we get through the next 5+ days. Luckily, again, this will happen presumably. There's the 24-hour period there, 36 hours. So most of the intensity guidance is low to moderate tropical storm moving through at the time that this will be approaching the Windward Islands. So really the heavy rainfall, and some of that rain could be very heavy, especially as this is intensifying. And that could lead to some flooding problems, especially in higher elevations. And then again, there will be some wind gusts to tropical storm force, especially in the higher elevations. So if you're down there, that's what to expect. It'll be kind of exciting, maybe a little nerve-wracking, something certainly different if you've never experienced it before, and maybe a little scary for some people. But all in all, this is not certainly what a hurricane would do, so at least there's that. Looking at the different ensemble tracks as I get into some of the complexities here as far as to where this ends up. This is the 6Z run, or 6UTC, Global Forecast System Ensemble Track Guidance. What does that mean? Well, these are all the different runs of the GFS model with slightly different variables to give you different outcomes. In some cases, dramatic different outcomes. And in this particular run, there's a pretty good envelope here, where everything's clustered. Sometimes you get them spread out all over the place, but on this particular run, it was a fairly tight cluster there showing a significant threat here to the mid-Atlantic and the Northeast. Will this be what happens? Well, it's impossible to say. This is just one snapshot of 20 different models run with different variables for each, and then you see the outcome here. How does it take this 90-degree turn, basically? Well, you have to think about high pressure out here, or wherever it is, holding this down. The pressure in the atmosphere keeps this moving westward, and when that high pressure is gone and releases, then this kind of just floats up like a balloon. If you have a balloon along the ceiling of your house, and then it finally reaches an open skylight, whoop, away it goes, right? And so it's a very similar process that the storm keeps buried down in a low latitude because of pressure up here being higher, all right? And so this low pressure being less dense overall, it's easier to keep it squashed to the south. So once you remove that high pressure or move it away, you open up an alleyway. So there may be high pressure over here, and then this alleyway of lower pressure allows this to escape. And that's how it can do so. We saw Hazel do that in 1954. Not saying this will end up like Hazel, but it does happen. It's rare, but it does happen. On the other hand, the European and its ensembles from last night, the 0Z run, and this is a very fascinating map showing you the different probabilities and the densities of that occurrence happening, and then your operational run right here, and then the different spread. I like the color spectrum kind of showing you with gradients, or the density here, what is more likely to happen in that particular run. So you notice there are some of the members that come up and follow a GFS type track, but a lot of these members come over and are more sort of like this. And then overall, in the lighter shading, it's more aimed towards the southeast Gulf of Mexico. So there's a lot of spread here. If we go back and look at the GFS, pretty tightly clustered from that run overnight into the early morning hours. And then the Euro here spread pretty far from the east side to the west side. And this has more members, by the way, 51 different total, 50 to 51, something like that, total ensemble, I guess if you include the operational in here. So there's a lot more model runs with the European ensemble system, and it just shows you this is going to be a tough call. Now, as far as intensity, what about the Madden-Julian oscillation? I haven't mentioned this in a while because it's been kind of in this dead zone or over here in the West Pac. Now, the GFS indicating that the Madden-Julian oscillation turns into a more favorable area for the Western Hemisphere over the next couple of weeks, during the time frame that this system was out there. And interestingly enough, the European model is a little slower with that progression, but it's still there nonetheless, and you can see the edges of the envelope here moving out into phases 8 and 1, and this favors upward motion on a wider scale, less shear, less dry air, more divergence in the atmosphere, the air rising more efficiently in this type of a pattern. And both of the major models, the GFS here more aggressive, the European a little less so, but still headed towards that phase 8 and 1 region. It would be different if the European was like over here and the GFS was over here and there was a big difference between the two, but there's not. They're fairly similar, just a difference in the timing, it looks like. So we're going to have to watch that. So let's take a look at a couple of scenarios. What if this does, in fact, track along the East Coast and try to make a run for New England? Water temperatures along that area up until about 38 degrees latitude, very warm, low to mid 80s, so that would definitely support a fast-moving hurricane remaining a hurricane up into this region or up in towards Nova Scotia. It's possible, so just something to keep in mind. If this ends up moving more like the European model is suggesting with its ensemble members towards the Gulf of Mexico here, well, it's goes without saying, water temps here can support very intense hurricanes as we get into October. So we need to keep an eye on this, see what happens with it. I do want to show you real quick the latest GFS run from this morning's run. I'm going to just sort of page through these images quickly here. what you're going to be looking for down here in the lower right-hand corner. Here's the Windward and Leeward Islands, Barbados there. So let's watch what happens. It moves into the frame in the overnight hours tonight, moving through the daytime on Wednesday. And you see, it doesn't really show much intensification until later as we get towards Thursday or so. The vorticity signature here getting stronger after it passes the Windward Islands, so that's good for them. And then it moves to the south and west just a little bit, slows down pretty significantly, and then it starts to make that turn the closer to day 5 that we get, moving it closer to the Haitian Peninsula here, well to the south and east of Jamaica. So, will this be what happens? I just don't know. I wish that I did. Let me see. Yeah, that was the last frame. So, from here, a lot of the U.S. generated models bring it up and sort of out. We'll see what the European and its ensembles do if it's more in this area. Stay tuned. I mean, this is going to be a cliffhanger, and it's just like we had last year with Joaquin. I tell you, it's unbelievable the irony there that, the American models brought it into the mid-Atlantic, and the Euro was the outlier trying to take it out to sea, and it ended up being right. So what if the Euro is right again this year, and it's farther west and north, eventually towards the Northwest Caribbean before turning? Well, then we could have a substantially different outcome. So pay attention. Don't get too upset about it just yet. There's no reason to. And if you're in the Windward Islands, be ready for those squally tropical storm conditions that are probably headed your way. And the rest we'll all find out together. Have a great rest of your Tuesday afternoon. As always, thanks for tuning in. I'm Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com. And you can bet I'll be back with you with a lot more tomorrow.